Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company, and today we're going to take a walk through my fall garden and I'm going to talk about cool season crops with you guys. But before I do that, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you can be notified anytime we put out an awesome video for you. Okay, so right out the gate, before we get into it, let's talk about different crops. So as you may know, there are cool season crop and there are warm season crop. Those are two different groups. In Southern California in zone 9 and 10, we are growing our cool season crops right now. Now, what are those collective cool season crops? So those are all of your leafy greens, so all of your lettuces, lettuce mixes like mesclun mix, all of those greens. Your dark leafy greens like collard greens, kale, Portuguese kale, Ethiopian kale, any dark leafy green that you eat. All of your brassicas, so that's broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. And it's all of your root crops like your beets, radishes, rutabagas, turnips, anything that you eat out of the ground. Carrots is another one. And then also peas and onions. Those are all crops that you plant in the cool season. So in the fall and the winter into the early spring. And let's not forget a couple other ones like fava beans. Even though they're a bean, you do plant those in the cool season here in zone 9 and 10. Celery is another one, and plenty of herbs really like cool weather. That's dill, cilantro, parsley, fennel. The list goes on and on and on. We have a complete list of all these crops on our website. But what's important to remember is all of these crops like to grow in cool weather. And the other key factor that these crops like is they like to grow when the days are getting shorter. So that means fall time when our days are getting shorter all the way through the winter and then into the spring. Let's think about what typically happens with a lot of our herbs, for example. You plant them in the fall, they grow all fall, all winter, spring comes, days get longer. What's the first thing that they do? They go to flower. They're doing that because they're biologically triggered by the amount of sunlight to go to flower and then go to seed. Here's a good example. This is our fennel, and this is seeding from springtime and summertime. So we planted this last fall. It grew all the way through the wintertime and into the spring. As the spring came, it flowered, it set its seed throughout the summer, and now we've got to harvest the rest of these seeds from this plant. And this plant will do that every time. If you try to plant a cool season crop in the summer, it's not going to grow well because it's too hot. But the other big factor is it's not going to grow very well because the days are too long, and it's going to tell the plant immediately, go to flower and go to seed. That process is called bolting. And you want to prevent that if you want things like beautiful heads of lettuce or beautiful heads of broccoli. I've actually got an example over here of a broccoli this broccoli actually just popped up in the garden in late summer, but the days were still really long. And so what did the plant do? It said, hey, it's time to go to flower. It's time to set my seeds, which is a natural process. But I don't want to eat this. I want to eat beautiful heads of broccoli. So by planting them now, as the days get shorter, I can guarantee that happens. So for those of you that don't know, all these beautiful little yellow flowers, that's actually this or this. So this is the immature flower head that's all grown very close together, and as it gets bigger, it's going to start opening up, as you can see here, and you can actually see the process happening where this one is opening up. So when it fully opens, it will look something like this. And for those of you that don't know, where do the seeds come from? It's very interesting. These tiny little pods here are the immature seeds, and those will eventually swell up and fill up with seeds, and that's where you get broccoli seeds. So pretty neat how nature works and where seeds come from. So let's remember that plants, their biological purpose is to set seed and pass on their genetics, right? That's what they want to do. And in some situations, like with broccoli, if we want to eat the beautiful head of broccoli, we want to eat it before that happens, or we want to prevent that from happening so we get a nice, big, beautiful head of broccoli to enjoy. So it is a very natural process, but depending on how you want to enjoy that food crop, you will either prevent that from happening or eat it before that happens. So Now let's go on a little tour of my garden and I can show you all the cool season stuff I've got growing and where it is in its growing stage and why it might be doing what it is doing. So here I have a patch of celery that has popped up from previous seed production, and it's growing really nicely right now because the days are short and it is bulking up on its foliage and on the actual plant matter that we're going to eat right now. As soon as the days start getting longer in the spring, even in, come January, when our days start getting a few minutes longer, it will trigger to the plant to send out a central stalk, and that central stalk will put out its flowers and then eventually its seed, and that's how you grow celery seed. So this is what this plant looks like now. If I try to grow this too late in the season, the first thing it's gonna wanna do is go to flower and then go to seed. It's a natural process. So let's talk about lettuce a little bit. I've got a nice little patch of lettuce over here that looks really good. We planted this I can look at the tag, and we planted it from seed in August. And actually we've got videos on that from when we planted on the north side of our house. And now we have these gorgeous heads of lettuce. And they look really good, again, because the days are getting shorter. And so the plant is taking what little energy it has from its daylight use, or from the hours of daylight it gets, to photosynthesize and create these nice little heads of lettuce. As soon as the days get longer, you're gonna see, again, that central stalk in the lettuce start to form because it wants to go to flower. A natural process, but it makes the lettuce bitter. The flavor isn't as good, and at that point, unfortunately, you either have to start over, plant different varieties of lettuce, or it's usually a signal that you need to transition into your warm season crops. So these guys look really good. We've got some bok choy over here that also look equally as pretty. I mean, look at these. I love bok choy because of the way they have this cute little root, and then they have the whole plant, and so you can just harvest this whole thing like it's almost like a bouquet of flowers. Bok choy is a fabulous crop for zones 9 and 10 because it can be very heat tolerant, and the other day it was 80, so it didn't really feel like fall here in Southern California. These guys did not care. They looked really good. So just like lettuce, this bok choy, as soon as the days start getting longer, the day length is going to signal to the plant, hey, it's time to go to flower. It's going to send out central stalk and flowers and start the seeding process. Now, many people ask me, can you just cut that off and let the plant continue to produce outer leaves or whatever that you're eating? You can, but the flavor is always going to deteriorate. As a natural defense mechanism, plants tend to get bitter as they're going to seed because they don't want animals to eat them. They want to protect their seed and their genetics so that they can pass it on. So you can't really revive the flavor at that point. And I like to tell people that that's a cue from nature that things are changing. There's subtle changes in the season. It's a cue to switch the plants that you're growing. So as soon as you start seeing your lettuce go to seed, as soon as you start seeing your lettuce go to flower and other crops bolting, that should be a cue to switch to warm season crops. So let's look at our broccoli over here. We've got some nice pretty broccoli plants. They're looking really good. They're nice and big. We don't have any heads yet, and that's okay. These were planted a few weeks later than my earlier broccoli, so they're gonna be staggered behind the production of the earlier broccoli, and I'm okay with that. I don't want 20 heads of broccoli at the same time. I simply can't eat all that. So these guys are growing a little bit slower. You can see that they don't have any head here. Whereas we'll take a peek at the other broccoli and you can see those do have little heads that are forming. And that's because they had a few extra weeks of planting time. They were planted a few weeks before. The days were a little bit longer, so they got more sunlight. They could photosynthesize more, so they grew a little bit quicker. So if you haven't noticed, I'm really harping on a pattern here that happens in nature that I really hope gardeners can understand and apply to growing, because all of a sudden it opens up these doors where you go, oh yeah, that's why that plant is doing that. It's not necessarily the watering or the soil that you planted it in, it is the amount of hours of sunlight. So let's go look at that bigger head of broccoli. Okay, so we have here a broccoli that is obviously much further ahead than the other broccoli, and that's because it was planted several weeks prior to the broccoli that isn't forming a head yet. So it had extra time, more hours of sunlight, so it really grew very quickly. And now it's gonna start to slow down because our days are getting shorter, and it's really gonna concentrate a lot of its energy into making a very condensed broccoli head, which is what you want. Now, if I were to just leave this plant here and let it grow all the way into the spring, as soon as our days get longer, you're gonna see that broccoli head start to open up like we did earlier in the video, and each little floret's gonna open up and eventually become a flower and eventually go to seed. That's how that process naturally happens. I want to eat this and enjoy this when the broccoli head is nice and condensed and really, a beautiful broccoli head that I can enjoy in the kitchen. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about herbs. Herbs are a fabulous plant that you can grow in pots on your patio. You don't need a lot of space, and they do really well in our fall weather because it's mild. We actually get free water from the sky, which is really great. So I've got my herb boxes here, and as you can tell, they're insanely overgrown because they're so happy. We've got these planted in these birdies boxes with really good soil, and they're really a little too unruly. And what needs to happen at this point is they need to get cut back so that they can regenerate and grow really nicely through the cool season. You can see what happened was, this summer, they grew, and when the days were really long, they went to flower. You can actually see some flower on this is Mexican oregano. And then they started to go to seed. So they set their little seed pods, and they have produced seed, very, very tiny seed, that they will spread out through the garden. Now, I'm going to cut these back, not just because they look pretty unruly and crazy, but also because the plant has already gone through its biological cycle of flowering and setting seed. And so everything up here is it's not gonna ever look really good again. So I'm gonna chop it back down. I'll probably cut this way down here, and it will regenerate beautiful new leaves that look a lot, healthier and happier. And I can still cook with this. It will be more pungent, but you can dry it, and that will help alleviate some of that really intense flavor. But I'm gonna cut it back so it looks nicer. You can see back here, I've got some other herbs. This is a marjoram that has also gone to flower and gone to seed. And you can see here, it's already doing exactly what I had mentioned. Down here, it's regenerating new leaves that look so much better and so much happier, but they're struggling because of all of these flowers and spent flowers and seed pods. So I want to cut this back so I can let all that new growth come forward and really look awesome. So if you're in the garden right now, or watching this video and you're thinking to yourself, well, I haven't started anything and it's November. Don't worry, it's not too late. You have plenty of time. Keep in mind, as the days get shorter, the slower the plant will grow. And so you'll go out into your garden in late December or January, and you'll be looking at the plants going, okay, why aren't you doing anything? Well, the days are shorter, the weather's cooler, the biological activity in the soil is just slower because of the temperatures. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that you can't start plants right now. I encourage you to do so, especially herbs. They're very simple. You can stick them in the ground, enjoy them throughout the holiday season when you're probably going to be using a lot of herbs. The point is just to get in the garden and get growing. I promise you it'll make your life better and more enjoyable, and you will learn something, which is the most important part of gardening.